Give me liberty and give me Annette.
Hello and welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where I talk about the Constitution, politics, history, pretty much anything else I want to talk about. And you can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. If you want to see what I look like while I'm talking on here, go to youtube.com/Annette Talks. All right, I've been wanting to do this topic for a while. A few episodes ago, I did an episode on Antifa, or or however you want to say that. So today I'm going to do one on Black Lives Matter. And the reason I wanted to cover both of those topics is because those are the two entities that have basically declared war on our country, and they have similar goals. So you need to know who these people are and what their goals are in order to combat them and their goals. And I don't think most people understand Black Lives Matter. They just think, oh, I'm so woke. Black Lives Matter, and they use a hashtag, look at how woke I am. Or, they're well-meaning and they think, well, of course I believe in black rights and black equality for blacks or African Americans, however you want to put it. I think, but they see everything going on, and they see everyone on Facebook, Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter. And that's what it means. That's all it means to them, is that they believe in equality. So they are well-meaning. I think you are the people I'm trying to reach. I know you're well-meaning. I know what you were saying when you were using your hashtag Black Lives Matter. The problem is that there's an organization called Black Lives Matter, and they are using you and your hashtagging of their name to forward their agenda. And it's not just equality for black people. So I want to read to you a little bit about who Black Lives Matter is. And you can find you can go to their website and look them up, blacklivesmatter.com. I can never remember if it's .com or .org. It's .com. And you can read for yourself. But I want to give you some of their goals stated in their own words, just so you can get an idea of who they are. So first of all, they are trained Marxists. If that's not enough, I will keep going. They said that in their own words. I watched the video. There was an interview with one of the founders, and she said, when she was asked what their ideology is, she said, "We are trained Marxists." So if that's not enough, I'll keep going. I think that was enough for me to know I don't want anything to do with these folks. All right, so I took an article from GatesstoneInstitute.org, and because they lay it out very nicely for me. So I'm going to read a lot of what they had written, and they're going to quote the Black Lives Matter folks and their website, and I've looked at them and researched them as well. So, a recent survey by the Pew Research Center found that more than 2/3 of Americans support the Black Lives Matter movement. The high level of backing raises the question of how much the public knows about BLM. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I don't think most people have any clue. They just think that they're trying to support equal rights. On the surface, BLM presents itself as a grassroots movement dedicated to the noble task of fighting racism and police brutality. A deeper dive shows that BLM is a Marxist revolutionary movement aimed at transforming the United States and the entire world into a communist dystopia. Take that in. They're Marxists. They want a communist America. They want a communist world. That's who they are. This is not, I'm not stretching it. This is what they've said. They are trained Marxists. Okay, so the BLM's founders openly admit to being Marxist ideologues. Their self-confessed mentors include former members of the Weather Underground, a radical left-wing terrorist group that sought to bring a communist revolution to the United States in the 60s and 70s. And BLM is friendly with the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, whose socialist policies have brought economic collapse and untold misery to millions of people there. BLM states that it wants to abolish the nuclear family, police and prisons, heteronormativity, and capitalism. BLM and groups associated with it are demanding a moratorium on rent, mortgage and utilities, and reparations for a long list of grievances. BLM leaders have threatened to, quote, burn down the system, unquote, if their demands are not met. They are also training militias based on the militant Black Panther movement of the 1960s. BLM, which is not registered as a nonprofit organization for tax purposes, has raised tens of millions of dollars in donations. BLM's finances are opaque. BLM's donations are collected by Act Blue, a fundraising platform linked to the Democratic Party and causes associated with it. Indeed, BLM leaders have confirmed that their immediate goal is to remove U.S. President Donald J. Trump from office. Most importantly, the main premise of BLM is based on a lie, namely that the United States is at war with African Americans. Blacks are not being systematically targeted by whites. 50 years after the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, more than 3 in 4 Americans, including most whites and blacks, agreed that real progress has been made in getting rid of racial discrimination. Scholars have noted that BLM's inability to produce solid, empirical evidence of systemic racism explains why its leaders continue to broaden and deepen the indictment to include the entire American social and political order. So I want you to think about all that while I continue here. BLM is in its own words. We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia Garza, in particular, we're trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on ideological theories. If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it, all right? And I could be speaking figuratively. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. I just want black liberation and black sovereignty by any means necessary. Stay in the streets. The system is throwing every diversionary and demobilizing tactic at us. We are fighting to end policing and prisons as a system which necessitates fighting white supremacist, capitalist, hetero-patriarchal imperialism. Vet your comrades and stay focused. White supremacist, capitalist, hetero-patriarchal imperialism. There's no such thing as blue lives. There is no hue of a blue life. Being a police officer is an occupation. It's a job. All lives matter is like saying the sky is blue. I haven't heard how police are on the right side of history. It's hundreds of years of generational oppression and trauma and infrastructural racism that impacts our bodies and makes our bodies more vulnerable to something like a COVID-19. I have no idea what that means, but that's what she said. Patrice Cullors. We say hashtag defund the police and hashtag defund Department of Corrections because they work in tandem. The rise of mass incarceration occurred alongside the rise of militarized and mass policing. They must be abolished as a system. We are anti-capitalist. We believe and understand that black people will never achieve liberation under the current global racialized capitalist system. All Lives Matter is little more than a racist dog whistle that attempts to both delegitimize centuries of claims of global anti-black oppression and position those who exhibit tremendous pride in their blackness as enemies of the state. Well, we are enemies of any racist, sexist, classist, xenophobic state that sanctions brutality and murder against marginalized people who deserve to live as free people. We stand with Palestinian civil society in calling for targeted sanctions in line with international law against Israel's colonial apartheid regime. So they're anti-Israeli. Surprise, surprise. We are an abolitionist movement. We do not believe in reforming the police, the state, or the prison industrial complex. Yes, I think the statues of the white European they claim is Jesus should also come down. They are a form of white supremacy. Always have been. In the Bible, when the family of Jesus wanted to hide and blend in, guess where they went? Egypt, not Denmark. Tear them down. We are living in a political moment where for the first time in a long time, we are talking about alternatives to capitalism. Anti-racism is anti-capitalist and vice versa. There are no two ways around it. To be an anti-racist must demand a complete rejection of business as usual. An end to racism demands transformation of the global political economic setup. Then it goes into this history about where Black Lives Matter came from. You can read that if you want on your own. What's the agenda? I think you can figure that out already by what I've just said. BLM's worldview is based on a mix of far-left theoretical frameworks, including critical race theory and intersectional theory. Critical race theory posits that racism is systemic based on a system of white supremacy and therefore a permanent feature of American life. Intersectional theory asserts that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression: their race, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. BLM and other purveyors of critical race theory and intersectional theory reject individual accountability for behavior, criminal or otherwise, because, according to them, blacks are systemic and permanent victims of racism. Such racism, according to BLM, can only be defeated by completely dismantling the American economic, political, and social system and rebuilding it from scratch, according to Marxist principles. Black Lives Matter seeks to replace the foundational cornerstones of American society. 1. Abolish the Judeo-Christian concept of the traditional nuclear family, the basic social unit in America. Okay, let's get rid of the family. Number 2, abolish the police and dismantle the prison system. No police, no prisons. Number 3, mainstream transgenderism and delegitimize so-called heteronormativity, the belief that heterosexuality is the norm. And 4, abolish capitalism and replace it with communism. Okay, so first, abolish the traditional nuclear family. In its policy agenda, Black Lives Matter states that it is committed to abolishing the traditional nuclear family. This is what it says on their website, or it did. I mean, I hear that they keep changing it. Quote, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable," unquote. Villages. Collectively? Interesting. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels rejected the traditional family because, according to them, the nuclear family as an economic unit sustains the capitalist system. Engels wrote, "The care and education of the children becomes a public affair. Society looks after all children alike, whether they are legitimate or not." Unquote. Many experts have noted that African Americans need stronger, not weaker families. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. You can read about that if you want. Next one. Well, I will quote Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell, an African American economist and social theorist, opined that the Moynihan Report of 1965 may have been the last honest government report on race. By contrast, African American civil rights activists criticized Moynihan for blaming the victim. All right, so now I have to go and tell you what the Moynihan Report said. Many experts have noted that African Americans need stronger, not weaker families. In March 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, then an Assistant Secretary of Labor under U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson, wrote a groundbreaking report which focused on the roots of black poverty in the United States. The report linked the many problems plaguing of African Americans: crime, joblessness, school failure, out-of-wedlock births, to the breakdown of the traditional nuclear family. When the Moynihan Report was written in 1965, 25% of black children in the United States were born out of wedlock. 50 years later, in 2015, more than 75% of black children were born out of wedlock. So Moynihan's basically saying it's the family, the breakdown of the family, that's the problem. 20 years after the Moynihan Report, Glenn Loury, the first black economist to earn tenure at Harvard, lauded Moynihan as a prophet. The bottom stratum, quote, "The bottom stratum of the black community has compelling problems which can no longer be blamed solely on white racism and which force us to confront the fundamental failures in black society. The societal disorganization among poor blacks, the lacking academic performance of black students, the disturbingly high rate of black-on-black crime, and the alarming increase in early unwed pregnancies among blacks now loom as the primary obstacles to black progress." So they want to tear down the family that's already failing, and they want to put communism instead of doing what they should be doing, which is the opposite, supporting the family, which supports capitalism. All right, their next goal is abolish police and prisons. BLM states that it wants to defund and ultimately abolish police and prisons in the United States. Police officers will be replaced by educators, social workers, mental health experts, and religious leaders. who, according to BLM, would bring down the levels of crime. In an interview with Newsweek, BLM co-founder Cullors said, "The freedom of mostly white, affluent people is predicated on the unfreedom of black people. So law enforcement is not actually used to keep black people safe. They're used to patrol, occupy, harass, abuse, often hunt, and mostly that what we've seen is kill our communities. Policing and incarceration are part of a continuum. The policing is the first response, and then incarceration is the last response. And these two systems rely on each other very, very deeply. We have to be working on getting rid of both systems." In an interview with Hollywood Reporter, Cullors explained that she is not merely an activist but a modern-day abolitionist. An abolitionist believes in a world where police and prison are no longer weaponized as a tool for public safety. BLM co-founder Opal Tometi, in an interview with The New Yorker, claimed that policing in America has its roots in managing slavery and therefore is systematically racist. So police are come out of slavery. Everything comes out of slavery these days. 1619 Project. Everything is from slavery. She explained, "We have been fighting and advocating to stop a war on black lives, and that is how we see it. This is a war on black life. And people understand that this system is filled with all sorts of inequality and injustice, and that implicit bias and just outright racism is embedded in the way that policing is done in this nation. When you think about it historically, it was founded as a slave patrol. The evolution of policing was rooted in that." I think that's a huge stretch. First of all, I want to stop right here and say that, maybe there are some good arguments to be made about changing the way policing is done and what goes on in prisons and incarcerations. Heaven forbid, I would not want to end up in a prison. But the answer is not abolishing them, and their purpose is not to keep the black man down, to put criminals in prison, to keep the streets safe. I don't see how that's going to happen without someone with guns being able to stop other people with guns. So I don't think that educators, social workers, mental health experts, and religious leaders will be able to take the place of police. Now, I can see them having more of a place, for sure. But also, strengthening the family might just help with that. A good, strong father in the home helps a lot. I could get into a lot of that right now, but for the sake of time, I won't. I'm going to go on. Washington, D.C. Police Chief Peter Newsham has warned that underfunding police departments could cause an increase in excess force by police officers. The number one thing that contributes to excessive force in any police agency is when you underfund it. If you underfund a police agency, it impacts training, it impacts hiring, it impacts your ability to develop good leaders. The Los Angeles Police Protective League, the city's police union, said that budget cuts would be extremely irresponsible. Cutting the LAPD budget means longer responses to 911 emergency calls, officers calling for backup won't get it, and rape, murder, and assault investigations won't occur or will take forever to initiate, let alone complete. Polls show that most Americans, including most blacks, do not share BLM's views on abolishing the police. A recent Rasmussen's poll report found that 63% of American adults regard being a police officer as one of the most important jobs in our country today. Furthermore, 64% are concerned that current anti-police sentiment will lead to fewer people willing to become police officers and that it will reduce public safety in the community where they live. Importantly, according to the Rasmussen report, blacks, 67%, are the most concerned about public safety where they live compared to 63% of whites and 65% of other minority Americans. So the fact that this many people believe that police are important but also support Black Lives Matter shows you that they do not understand what Black Lives Matter actually wants. Okay, the next goal, abolish heteronormativity. Try saying that 5 times fast. BLM's policy agenda states, we are, and this is in quotes, and this is on their website, quote, we are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender, a term for people whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth, privilege and uplift black trans folk, especially black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. Doesn't sound a whole lot like black. It sounds more like trans. Anyway, going on, it says an academic study, unquote, an academic study titled The Queering of Black Lives Matter describes in great detail how issues of sexual identity and gender orientation have taken priority over BLM's original focus on police brutality. The heavy focus on sexuality has led to accusations that BLM is a gay movement masquerading as a black one. That's kind of the thought that I had when I read that. When there's this real specific focus on black trans women, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter. How many black trans women are there? Well, they're all on BLM, I guess. 2 of the 3 founders of BLM describe themselves as black queer females. One, Alicia Garza, is married to a biracial transgender male. Patrice Cullors describes herself as polyamorous. In interview after interview, Garza and Cullors raise the issue of black, trans, and gender non-conforming people, often to the exclusion of police brutality. In an interview with The New Yorker, Garza said that she is not interested in the American tradition of live and let live. Quote, "We want to make sure that people are not saying, well, whatever you are, I don't care. No, I want you to care. I want you to see all of me," unquote. So in other words, it's not about tolerance. It's about you are going to see who I am and you're going to approve of it. Next goal, abolish capitalism and the patriarchal system. BLM equates capitalism with racism in the same way that its Antifa cousins equate capitalism with fascism. BLM's view on capitalism, and I have to stop here and remind you, Chaz, or CHOP, as it was later known as in Seattle, where 6 blocks were taken over, that was Antifa and BLM. That's who this was. That's who was holding that part of the city. Okay. BLM's views on capitalism are based on the concept of, quote, racial capitalism, unquote, a term created by the late Cedric Robinson, who posited that capitalism and racism are 2 sides of the same coin. Both are, according to Robinson, dependent on slavery, violence, imperialism, and genocide. So, and this is like the 1619 Project. That's a project, you need to look that up if you haven't heard about it. It's in a lot of schools now. But their premise is that capitalism is based on slavery, and America was founded on slavery. And so that's why it all has to come down. Everything we have is all a result of slavery. All right, the British wing of Black Lives Matter UK states, "We're guided by a commitment to dismantle imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and the state structures that disproportionately harm Black people in Britain and around the world. The Movement for Black Lives Matter, M4BL, an ecosystem of over 170 Black-led organizations, including BLM, states, quote, "We are anti-capitalist. We believe and understand that Black people will never achieve liberation under the current global racialized capitalist system," unquote. M4BL demands a reconstruction of the economy to ensure Black communities have collective ownership and a progressive restructuring of tax code at the local, state, and federal levels to ensure a radical and sustainable redistribution of wealth. Redistribution of wealth, people. Communism. That's what it is. M4BL also demands reparations for past and continuing harms. People, it's about money. The government, quote, "The government, responsible corporations, and other institutions that have profited off of the harm they have inflicted on Black people, from colonialism to slavery, through food and housing redlining, mass incarceration and surveillance, must repair the harm done. This includes," quote, "full and free access for all Black people, including undocumented and currently and formerly incarcerated people, to lifetime education, a guaranteed minimum livable income for all Black people, reparations for the wealth extracted from our communities through environmental racism, slavery, food, apartheid, housing discrimination, and racialized capitalism," unquote. I have no idea how they would even decide. Even if everyone went along with this, how do you on earth do you decide what a reparation is for wealth extracted from the communities through environmental racism? I don't even know what that is. The demands of BLM and M4BL are similar to those found in the Communist Manifesto, which include, quote, "abolition of poverty in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, extension of factories and instrument of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan," unquote. Are you getting the idea here, people? hashtag Black Lives Matter, stop doing it. You're giving these people a little boost every time you do that because you don't know the difference between hashtag Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter Inc. Marxists, anti-family. These are not good people who just want equality for black people. BLM's immediate demand. BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors recently confirmed that the immediate goal is to remove U.S. President Donald J. Trump from office. Quote, Trump not only needs to not be in office in November, but he should resign now. Trump needs to be out of office. He is not fit for office. And so what we are going to push for is a move to get Trump out. While we're also going to continue to push and pressure Joe Biden around his policies and relationship to policing and criminalization. That's going to be important. But our goal is to get Trump out. Now, I'm not a huge Trump fan, but this makes me want to vote for Trump because they want him out so desperately. Evaluations of BLM's agenda. In an interview with Chanel Ryan I'm not going to go into this, okay? Basically, we can evaluate this for ourselves. Black Lives Matter wants to take down our country. That's why statues are coming down everywhere. I just did an interview with John Ziegler in my last podcast, and he talked about why and what happens. This is why statues of Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and everyone has to come down. We've got to get rid of the foundation. You've got to take out the idea that we are a country based on individual liberties. That's why statues are coming down. This has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with wanting communism and Marxism. So first you've got to get rid of the foundation. Once you tell everyone that the foundation doesn't matter, then anything goes, right? Then it's reparations and it's communism. This is why we're getting rid of this. And I'm going to tie this into something that you probably won't want to hear. But individual rights don't seem to matter much anymore. It doesn't matter if you want to run your business. We have a pandemic, an epidemic going on. You can close your business down. Wear your mask. Conform, people. Conform. Individual rights don't matter. Free speech? You want to go to church? Religion? No. Sorry, doesn't matter. We have to conform for the matter of safety. Safety is more important than individual rights. We are seeing our individual rights knocked down and people aren't standing up for them. Now we're seeing Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, all these statues coming down. Individual rights are on the decline because they are being dismantled by groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter and Americans who just are ignorant or don't care and would rather be safe. Safe and cozy. Take care of me, government. Take care of me. So we have these crazy groups who are out here pushing for Marxism, and instead of recognizing what Black Lives Matter means, we're going along with it. I'm telling you, this is the end of America if we don't wake up and realize what these people want and stop going along with it every time another one of our individual rights is taken away. Our individual rights to practice our religion, to say what we want to say, to assemble, that's huge, okay? We cannot just ignore these things and let them go because otherwise it all goes. It's a slippery slope. We lose our individual rights, slippery slope. We don't get them back. Communism, we start giving up our right to run our business, slippery slope. Property rights, out the door. Just like Ziegler pointed out in the interview, if we're giving out money because of a pandemic to just everyone gets a check for no reason, why not do reparations next? It's a big step, but it's not illogical. So I know I went off a bit there, but people, look it up. Go to blacklivesmatter.com and look it up. Go do some research. These are Marxist, anti-family, anti-straight, anti-police, anti-prison, anti-America, anti-freedom. You cannot ignore this. You cannot wait for it to go away. You cannot hashtag and try and look all woke. Black Lives Matter is not okay. I don't care who marches in their parades and their protests. You want another hashtag? Well, how about liberty and justice for all? Hashtag liberty and justice for all. How about hashtag we're all God's children? How about something that actually means what you're trying to say instead of woking yourself up to Black Lives Matter and making everyone support Marxists? All right, I'm going to get off this. Do the research for yourself, but just know that's who you're supporting when you hashtag. And I love you all, people. We are all children of God. I love all people. Okay? I don't care what your color is. I don't care what your gender is. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. I don't care anything. You're all God's children. What I do care about is saving this country because it's the best country on earth. It's blessed by God as long as we're righteous. It's not going to be blessed by God when we're not righteous. And it's not going to be blessed by God when we're giving in to groups like this that are trying to turn us into a Marxist country. All right. Thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness. Again, you can find me at AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, etc., etc.